Since before the days of Galileo, there has been perceived conflicts between faith and science. What's a Christian to do when you're discussing someone who believes that science is the ultimate truth? That's going to be our tough question today on Life Talks. My name is Dan. I'm with Ben. We're the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship. We are concluding a series today on some tough questions that Christians often ask or are asked in regard to just issues about the nature of God or the nature of truth. So, Ben, you and I both have had this happen to us. What do you do when someone says, yeah, but science and faith conflict all the time? There have been a lot of flawed and false positions taken by the church over the millennia. You can't trust your faith. We live in a culture today that's very naturalistic. We believe that science is God almost. And we have elevated scientists and scientific discovery to an incredible level of surety. Is that the best thing for a Christian to do? What do we do when it appears to conflict?
So I want to quote another line from Nacho Libre. I feel like it's so appropriate.
We
right
went
now.
from intellectual pursuit
Dan worked
sheer
really hard
idiocy.
on that. Dan worked really hard on that intro to sound so
smart,
professional and smart. And I'm like, I want to quote Nacho Libre. So Nacho Libre has his buddy Escalito, who they're wrestling buddies, and Nacho Libre, who's this Catholic friar guy, he's his wrestling partner Escalito says, "I don't believe in God. I only believe in science." And he has this shocked look on his face, like, "What? You don't believe in God?" But I think there's this misnomer, just even that picture within pop culture 10 years ago.
But that picture has become a reality for a large swath of Gen Z.
I think it was a caricature that says like you can only believe in God or you can only believe in science. You can't believe in both of them. And so that's why I bring that up there's this false dichotomy that you cannot hold both of those together. And that's just simply not true. And there's a lot of things we got to back way up if we're to answer this question. But I think what we have to understand is there was a time when, even during biblical times when people were writing the Bible, that when it came to science, it was not really good science. They really mixed religion and science very much, that there is these, in order to understand the way that the natural world worked, you had to understand the supernatural world. And we believe as Christians that there is a connection between the supernatural and natural. We don't see a dichotomy between the two. But what you saw, there was a book that was written in the 1870s that was very formative. It was by two men by the name of John Draper and Andrew White. And they wrote a book that basically argued that science and faith cannot coexist. And they used and again, this was about 5 years after Origin of the Species, Darwin and his theory of evolution. And so there was a massive movement going on to promote this ideology, more than just a scientific theory. It was an ideology. It was a philosophy, like you said, naturalism. Well, naturalism was built upon a foundation of modernism and rationalism that started 200 years prior. And so, when modernism and rationalism, those philosophical movements started permeating and integrating themselves into a culture, it was like, how do we explain things apart from God? And one of the things that Christians have been doing is constantly reacting to these isms, as opposed to saying, okay, well, let's pick and choose what's biblical, what's not biblical, because the Bible's always our authority. But when these two guys wrote this book, they used two major arguments to show how screwed up and how wrong the church was. And one is a lie, and one is a complete misrepresentation of the truth. And they used the flat earth idea that most Christians believe that the earth was flat, and it was proven that the earth is not flat. And then the other argument was, look at what the church did to Galileo. Okay? And so if you don't understand what happened in Galileo, basically back in the 1540s, Galileo had this, as he's observing the universe, says, wait, we're not geocentric, we're heliocentric. It means that the sun does not revolve around the earth, we revolve around the sun. And there's been a lot of people that have theorized that. It's not like Galileo was the first person, but he was the one that really because of the printing press, was able to promote his ideas in a broad way. And there was something. There was a great scholar, a Galileo scholar by the name of Stillman Drake, and when he wrote about Galileo's life, he said the issue between the Catholic Church and Galileo was not an issue between religion and science. It was an issue between authority and freedom of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a false argument to say that it was about religion and science of what Galileo taught, because there were a lot of Christians that believed in a heliocentric universe. But you have to, in the cultural context of what Galileo was doing, was what happened in 1517, 95 Theses, the birth of the Reformation. The Catholic Church was seeing its influence crumble before their eyes. And so here you had another person coming up with a new idea, and they squelched it because it was about, no, we're right, and everyone else is wrong. It was not an issue of religion and science. It was an issue of authoritarian power and freedom of expression. And so and the idea that most Christians thought that the earth was flat, no, that's not true. Most educated Christians, people who went to universities, who studied sciences, would believe that, no, the earth was not flat. The earth is, obviously a sphere. And so there were a lot of common uneducated people that believed that, but that didn't mean that was what the position of the church. So they start with a very faulty premise that the church was this institution keeping the world from understanding science. And it's actually the exact opposite. Some of the greatest scientists ever to live were people that were believers in God. And it was actually their understanding of God that drove them to a lot of their scientific theories and understanding. So, I mean, it's just a false idea that we have that the world somehow, the religion and science are somehow, you can't merge them.
Yeah, I would even suggest that it's a dangerous thing to study science without an appreciation for the supernatural, because it creates an arrogance.
Yes.
And also it robs us of hope. And then the other logical argument is, how can you know something's natural if there's not the presence, at least, of supernatural? It's how can you know that something is light if there wasn't the presence of dark?
Yes.
There is an ontological need, so to speak, for the supernatural that defies our ability to just simply explain it. And you look back over history, like Newton was a fervent believer.
Absolutely.
And he would have argued that the pursuit of science is the pursuit of God. And I think that was true of many of the greatest scientists.
Yes.
The more we unlock each little scientific mystery, the more
I
we
like
realize.
that, though. I like scientific ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
well,
we
it
need to start
truly
something.
is, but the more we unlock each mystery, the more we worship.
Yeah.
When we see the greatness, the complexity, the stunning creativity of God and His design, and again, all of creation just drips with design.
Yes.
If there's design, there has to be a designer.
Yes.
And this you cannot explain this as happenstance.
Absolutely.
And that requires, but in order to, if you're going to be fully devoted to the idea that there is no God, the only other solution is
naturalism.
chance. Yeah, it's chance, though. Also, the origin has to have begun by chance.
Yeah, and that requires a great book. I know we've referenced it before, but I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is a great book because it talks about how much you have to believe in order to believe there's no designer, there's no creator, there's no purpose to any of these things. That when we look at the natural design of things, that we're all of a sudden saying, oh, that just somehow evolved over time. And I think that's the idea of chance and mutations and time equals somehow where we have today. Man, that takes so much more faith than to believe that there is an all-powerful God that created this. Because everything we see, there's not a Norman Geisler, I had him for a class on this. He always just said, if a box of alphabets was tipped over on the table, and out of this box spelled, take out the garbage with the alphabets that were spelled out. Okay, you would not think, oh my goodness, the box just fell over and these few letters spelled out, can you take out the garbage? No, you'd think, well, the box spilled and someone had a little fun and they wanted me to give me a message to take out the garbage. that's just a few word statement that we would in our minds logically believe, okay, there is a messenger behind this message. Well, how much more when you look at all the the scientific finds that they've had, the DNA, unlocking the DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
The human genome, understanding the amount of genetic information in one human being is the amount of, if you could fill one encyclopedia up and stack them on 200 encyclopedias on every seat in Madison Square Garden. That's the genetic coding of every human being. And you're telling me you take one of those strands off and all of a sudden you don't have a human being anymore. Whoa, the amount of faith you need to believe that genetic information just somehow arrived or evolved without any kind of design. That takes faith. And so, yeah, it's just something that I think a lot of people in their naturalistic way, they want to hold on to an explanation of things that they don't want to acknowledge that there is a God.
Yeah, and that's an important thing, and we see it in Romans, chapter 1 and other places. But the notion is, man is yet to find an argument he's not willing to consider if it means he does not have to be accountable to God. And that's been part of the whole thing since the
So true.
origin of sin.
Yeah.
And I also feel like a lot of our young people, because I spend a lot of time with them, I want to just caution those. For instance, I'm not a person who says don't consider the other arguments. I've known people, I've grown up and like, don't read that stuff, it'll pollute your mind. I just think you have to read everything with caution.
Yeah.
But to particularly, this is the time of the year when we're taping this, when a lot of our young people are going to college, and I've been working with them, trying to prep them for that time. And they'll let one person who probably has never studied 10 minutes worth of theology in his life be responsible for dismantling their entire faith. They're listening to the wrong people.
Yeah.
They're not listening to a balanced thing. The arguments for naturalism are very easily, I can't force anybody to believe.
Right.
We often end up believing what we want to believe.
That's right.
But I will tell you, there are logical answers
Mm-hmm.
that aren't just, well, the Bible says, to
Yes.
all of the questions
Yes.
that we pose to science, or that science poses to us, as to why there is no God, or to
Yes.
why there can't be a God,
Yes.
or why he's irrelevant. And if you're going to be well educated, if you're going to take a position on this, you better do your homework.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think many times Christians feel like we have to be defensive in that we're the ones that don't have the answers. And really, the more that you question them, like, they have a lot of questions that they cannot answer. Like, for example, I remember this one quote or this one video thing where someone from a creation research organization was asking a question of a scientist and said, can you think of one time, just give me one example of when a mutation happened that was when it added genetic information? Because most mutations, there's a decrease in genetic mutation. So what they're saying is, well, over time, mutations led to the evolution. He's like, well, that goes against science, observable, factual, evidential science that we've never been able to observe a mutation leading to more genetic information. And this guy sat there, without any cutting, it was just, he sat there for like 5 minutes and he couldn't answer the question. And so how do they answer that? There's so many questions that they can't answer. Don't be afraid. I know one of the things that we used to do when I was a youth pastor when you were the senior pastor is we used to give every person who graduated from high school the New Evidence That Demands a Verdict from Josh McDowell, that giant thick book. And I don't know how well that served many students, but we knew that they were going to be tested. And whether it's Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel or Evidence Demands a Verdict, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. There's so many books that are out there that you can resource yourself with to be knowledgeable so that you don't have to feel afraid walking into biology, intro to biology, in college.
Yeah, and that's another thing I always tell our young people is, I don't know doesn't mean there isn't a good answer.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's
That's
perfectly
really
acceptable
good.
to say, I don't know, but let me study that some more. Let me get back to you. Just because somebody pulls, a move on you, an intellectual move on you that's put you on the defensive for a moment, still doesn't mean that you're wrong. You
Yeah.
can still win the bout,
Yeah.
but you may need to go back and do some study.
Mm.
However, I also say I don't have a lot of I used to, but I don't anymore. I don't have a lot of passion trying to convince someone who has already declared themselves unconvincible. So there's plenty of people that I can have a rational, unemotional conversation with. I can challenge their worldview. I can challenge them to think a little deeper.
Yeah.
That the Holy Spirit may use to draw them to faith and repentance. That I'm not going to just spend a whole lot of energy. I've known some well-meaning Christians who will get on Reddit and just debate until they're and feel like they've accomplished something, and really they've accomplished nothing.
Yeah.
You got some unshaven slob in somebody's mom basement who read one of the four atheist horses of the apocalypse and thinks that they're an expert.
Yeah. But you said something. I just want to stop you. You said something about worldview. And to me, that's what we're really talking about here.
Absolutely.
Because science and faith don't contradict each other. There's never been a contradiction between faith and science. What you're really arguing against is scientism, the belief that there is only science, and a belief in a theistic worldview. And so, or naturalism, whatever you want to call it. But that's what the real argument is about. Don't get stuck in the weeds of trying to argue these details of saying, you got to back up because it's the worldview that influences your philosophy, and your philosophy that influences the interpretation of what you're seeing in life.
Yeah. That's such an important thing for every parent to know, that worldview education for your young people is an essential in giving them the tools with which they can survive a world that's anti-Christian, anti-faith.
Yes.
And worldview is the lens through which we view all of the data, all the information, all the isms, and all the ologies.
Yes.
And it's really the foundation for sound thinking. But there isn't just one worldview. And so we have to educate ourselves out. I'm a contention that there are only two worldviews if you want to be a purist about it. Either you believe that there is a God and he matters, or you don't. You may believe, well, there may be some kind of God, little g, or gods, but they really are not as relevant as others would make them to be.
Yeah.
Whereas my worldview is, there is a God. He is above all other gods, and he absolutely matters because he began it all. Those two positions change how I view everything from art to science to just everything.
Yes.
And for someone to just dismiss that summarily says you're not taking the time to understand how people think or where people are coming from. And so don't accuse me of being what you are demonstrating in glowing color here.
Yeah.
And so those are the times where you can educate yourself, know the right apologetic questions to ask. But I would also just say, don't get sucked into the black hole of debate, because if you do, you'll just lose your mind eventually.
Yeah, and I think that's really wise. So, I think we only have a couple minutes left here, but there's a couple things. I think it's really important to understand that there are certain things that science cannot answer. They can't. Okay, so for example, science cannot explain meaning and purpose in life. Can't do it. Science can science is about observing the natural realm and trying to come up with some underlying principles of how things work, okay? But one of the things we also know about science is always changing. We're always discovering new things. And so what we previously thought, we discovered, this is something new. Well, there are certain things that we know the Bible's never been proven wrong. And so what are you going to put your faith in? Something that could be, we've discovered a new level of science. And again, it doesn't mean that. It just means that there's more technology to understand, observable reality or the natural way of things. But, it can't explain meaning and purpose. It can't explain morality and ethics. It can't explain the supernatural. It can't, even I was in a conference a few years ago, and it was an apologetics conference. And one of the things that they talked about was this idea that science cannot explain consciousness. They can measure and observe synapses between neurons and brain. They can measure brain activity, but they do not understand why there's actually a consciousness to our body. They can't explain the soul in the human body. And that is really difficult. They have no answer for that. And I remember listening to the scientists who had studied this whole issue. I think it was like Oxford or Cambridge, one of those big universities in England that everyone respects. But they were dumbfounded. They're like, there's no way, there's no scientific explanation for why there's a conscious and or why there's not. And so that, to me, there's certain things that science still cannot explain and you can't lean on for science, which is why you need the supernatural in life.
Yeah. Often, and we heard this during COVID and other times, where people want to say the
Trust.
Science is settled.
Trust the science.
Yeah. Well, the science is not settled because all it takes for all of human history, people said authoritative things about what they thought was settled science, only to find out that they didn't have a clue.
Yeah. So, I mean, even think about 3 years ago, what we thought we knew about COVID to what we know today.
Exactly.
And so many things that were like, oh, these people didn't want you to know this. I mean, it's just, there's so much messiness in that.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing about theology is we encourage you to ask the tough questions.
Yes,
we want
absolutely.
you to pursue God. He will reveal himself to you. We want you to do that. When you come up to someone, who has a view of science and naturalism that says, don't question.
Yeah.
That ought to be a warning,
Red
Will
flag.
Robinson. That's a problem. Well, we're out of time. Ben, thank you. That's stimulating. And again, as all of our conversations are, this is not intended to be the end of your journey. It's intended to be the beginning of your journey. Ben mentioned a half a dozen books. We can always share with you more ideas on books you should be reading, but continue your exploration, continue conversations, and listen to the Word of God as it speaks to you and leads you into all truth. As always, we thank you for joining us here at Life Talks. If you have any suggestions, ideas, or questions, you can hit us up at lifetalks@lifecharlotte.com. Share us on social media, and until next time, thanks for joining us here at Life Talks.